My husband's mistress thought she'd steal him from me and take my house too, until I revealed something that shocked her. The day I caught my husband cheating, I was wearing compression socks with tiny lemons on them, because that's what passes for personality when you live in scrubs. I had just walked out of a meeting at the hospital where a doctor talked to me like I personally invented staffing shortages, and I was sitting in my car in the employee lot trying to remember what it felt like to breathe without a timer. My phone rang and it was my best friend, and the way she said my name made my stomach drop before she even said anything else. "Are you at that restaurant off the highway?" she asked. I blinked at the steering wheel. "No, why would I be there?" "I just saw your husband," she said, and then rushed the rest out like she wanted it to land softly. "I thought you were with him." My hands went cold. I did that stupid thing people do when something bad happens, and you try to turn it into a joke so it doesn't become real. "He told me he's still at the office," I said, laughing once, dry and wrong. There was a pause, the kind that feels like a door closing. I called him right there. He picked up on the third ring, too quick, like he'd been waiting for the screen to light up. "Hey, babe," he said, bright and breathy. "Where are you?" I asked. I tried to sound normal, like I wasn't about to swallow my own pulse. "At work," he said instantly. "Late meeting. It's a mess. I'll be home late." He said it like he was reading from a script. And the thing is, he was good at scripts. He was a sales manager at a distribution company. His entire job was convincing people that the story he was telling was the truth, and for 2 years of marriage, I'd been one of his easiest customers. "Okay," I said, because my mouth was still pretending my life was normal. Then I hung up and just stared at the dashboard until my vision went a little fuzzy. My name is Blythe. Yes, that's my real name. And no, it has never made my life soft or delicate, like people assume. I'm in my early 30s, and I work as a nursing coordinator at a regional hospital in the United States, which is a fancy way of saying I spend my days putting out fires with a clipboard. I do schedules, I handle complaints, I play therapist to burned-out nurses and punching bag to stressed-out families, and I keep telling myself it matters because it does. It also drains you in a way that makes your bones feel tired. 2 years ago, when I married my husband, we started out in a rental like most people do. It was fine. In that bland way, rentals are fine when you're trying to pretend you're stable. Then, about 18 months ago, my grandmother passed and left me her house, and we moved into it. I remember standing in the kitchen with the papers in my hand and thinking, this is mine. Not ours, not someday, not maybe. Mine. The house wasn't huge, but it was solid. It was the kind of place with a creaky hallway and a backyard you have to mow even when you're depressed, because neighbors love judging grass. It had a little porch where my grandmother used to sit with her coffee and watch the street like it was a reality show. It was valued somewhere around $380,000, which sounds like a fortune until you remember it's a normal house in the United States, and housing prices are a joke nobody's laughing at. And no, before anyone asks, it wasn't magically free just because it was inherited. The house wasn't fully paid off when it came to me. There was still a remaining balance and ongoing costs, so the word mortgage was technically true, even if it didn't feel like mine emotionally yet. Between taxes, insurance, repairs, and that leftover balance, it was still the kind of blessing that comes with a monthly reminder attached. My husband loved that house. I told myself he loved it because it was our home. Looking back, I can admit the other truth without choking on it. He loved what it represented. Security, status, a shortcut. And the worst part? I ignored the tiny warning signs because I wanted a calm life so badly. I wanted to be the woman who didn't have drama. I wanted to be the woman who had a husband and a house and a job and could just go to work, come home, eat dinner, and watch some mindless show until she fell asleep. Instead, I ended up driving 40 minutes to a restaurant I didn't even like. I didn't go in right away. I parked, took a breath, and told myself my best friend could be wrong. Maybe he was there with a client. Maybe it was some coworker who looked like him. Maybe the universe wasn't about to dropkick my life. Then I saw him through the window. He was leaning in close to a woman with glossy hair and a laugh that carried through the glass. Her hand was on his forearm like she had a right to be there. He looked relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months, like his body knew he was exactly where he wanted it to be. And I recognized her immediately, because she's been a shadow on my life since childhood. I call her the woman because I refuse to give her the dignity of a name in my story. She was a known quantity at every family event because her parents have been close friends with mine for decades, the kind of friendships my mother treats like a blood oath. Growing up, the woman was always around, always smiling too sweetly, always making little comments that looked innocent if you didn't know her. She wasn't the type who shoved you into lockers. She was the type who laughed when someone else did, then asked you later if you were okay in that fake concern voice that makes you feel smaller. When I was younger, she copied me in the most annoying ways. If I got bangs, she got bangs. If I started wearing a certain color, she did too, but better. If I got praised for a grade, she'd ask loudly if I'd cheated and then giggle like it was a joke. As adults, she got slicker. She'd compliment my job in this syrupy tone, like she was praising a child for tying their shoes. She'd ask what I made, what my schedule was, whether my husband helped me, and she'd do it all with that soft smile that makes you sound paranoid if you call it out. So when I saw her hand on my husband's arm, it didn't even feel like a surprise. It felt like the last piece sliding into place, like my life had been building toward this moment and I'd just been too tired to notice. I didn't storm in. I didn't throw a drink. I didn't make a scene. I sat there, frozen, feeling like I'd been sedated. My body went heavy. My thoughts slowed down. I lifted my phone, hands trembling, and took a photo through the window. It wasn't cinematic. It was proof. The kind of proof you take when you already know people are going to ask, "Are you sure?" Then, still sitting in my car, I opened my phone and created a new email account. A secret one. Right there in the parking lot like a paranoid teenager hiding a diary. I can hear myself now. "Hi, yes, I'm a married woman with a full-time job and a joint account. And I'm making burner emails in a parking lot." I sent the photo to myself because I suddenly trusted nothing. Not my phone, not my memory, not my ability to stay calm. I drove home on autopilot. I took a shower that didn't wash anything off. I ate cereal for dinner because the idea of real food made me gag. When my husband called later and said he'd be working late, the audacity made my jaw ache from clenching. "Okay," I said, like I was polite to my own destruction. That night, he still came home eventually, showered, slid into bed, and breathed beside me like nothing happened. I stared at the ceiling and counted his breaths like a metronome, because focusing on anything else made me feel like I might start screaming and never stop. The next morning, I texted a coworker of his, someone I'd met once at a holiday party and barely knew. I kept it casual because I still had this embarrassing shred of hope that maybe there was a normal explanation. "Hey, random question, was he in yesterday?" The coworker answered faster than I expected. "He called out sick." I stared at the screen until the words lost meaning. Called out sick, while he was 40 minutes away, laughing with the woman. That night, I listened to my husband talk about stress and targets and traffic, and I realized something that scared me almost as much as the cheating. He wasn't just lying. He was comfortable lying. He'd been practicing. I went to sleep with my heart pounding, not because I didn't know what happened, but because I suddenly understood I didn't know who I'd married. The next few days blurred together in that ugly way where your body shows up to life, but your brain stays somewhere else. I went to work. I handled a staffing emergency. I smiled at a family while my thoughts screamed. I came home and cooked dinner while my hands felt detached from my body. I listened to my husband talk about a rough quarter, and I nodded like a good wife. Like I wasn't holding a photo of him wrapped around someone else. By Friday, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I called my best friend, and my voice cracked the second she answered. "I saw them," I said. "I took a picture." "Okay," she said immediately. Soft but firm. "Good. Not good, but you know what I mean. I'm coming over." She showed up with takeout and that particular kind of calm that only comes from someone who loves you enough to be practical. We sat at my grandmother's kitchen table and went through our accounts like we were preparing for a hurricane. The first thing we found was the dinners, multiple. Then hotel reservations. Then a charge from a boutique-looking place that screamed gift. My face got hot in that humiliating way, like my body was angry on my behalf. "He used our card," I whispered. "Or your card," my best friend corrected gently, because most of the money in our joint account was mine. I made more than he did, and I'd insisted on a decent emergency fund because hospitals teach you that life can flip without warning. He'd always acted grateful for my planning. Turns out he just liked having access. We also found smaller things, cash withdrawals that didn't match anything in our budget, a subscription for some premium app I didn't recognize. Not huge money, but the pattern was loud. The secrecy was loud. It felt like my marriage had been quietly siphoned for months, and I'd been too tired to hear the suction sound. That weekend, I started doing something I never thought I'd do. I began treating my own life like a report. I wrote down dates. I wrote down what he said and what I later proved wasn't true. I hated myself for it. I hated that it made me feel sneaky. But my best friend said, "You're not being sneaky. You're being sane. This is how you keep him from rewriting history." On Monday, I went to the bank on my lunch break and opened an individual account. I transferred half the emergency savings because half was defensible and because I was terrified moving too much would trigger him. It's wild, the way you start thinking in these tiny survival steps. How do I protect myself without setting him off? How do I take care of my future without starting a war in my kitchen? That night, he left his tablet on the couch. My heart started pounding like it knew. I picked it up anyway. It was still logged in. The messages were there, right in the open, like he couldn't even be bothered to hide properly. He complained about me like I was an inconvenience. He called me uptight. He told her I was married to my job. He said he missed feeling wanted. And then I saw the line that made my hands go numb. We just have to get the house sorted before I make anything official. House sorted. Like my grandmother's home was a loose end on a checklist. I took screenshots until my finger cramped. I sent them to my secret email. I sent them to my best friend. I felt ridiculous and desperate and also weirdly focused, like my brain had finally picked a direction. Then I heard the front door open. My whole body went into panic mode. I shoved the tablet under a pillow, climbed into bed and pulled the blanket up like I was hiding from a storm. He walked into the bedroom and stood there too long. I could feel his eyes on me. "You okay?" he asked. "Bad headache," I lied. He hummed like he was filing it away. Then he went to the kitchen. I waited until his footsteps moved away, then rushed to the bathroom and threw up, quietly. Because apparently I was now the kind of woman who threw up in her own house and tried not to be heard. I sat on the tile floor afterward, shaking, forehead against the tub, thinking, this is my marriage. This is what it has turned me into. 3 days later, I made a small mistake at work, the kind that normally wouldn't matter, but in my brain, it felt like proof I was falling apart. I double-booked 2 nurses on one unit and left another short for half an hour. It got fixed fast. Nobody got hurt, but my boss pulled me aside and asked, "Are you okay? You're usually on top of this." I wanted to tell her, "Actually, I'm living in a private disaster." Instead, I smiled and said, "I'm tired," which was true, but it was also a coward's answer. On the drive home, I realized something else I didn't like admitting. I didn't want to confront him in my house. I didn't want him to have the chance to look me in the eyes, deny, and watch me doubt myself. I needed the kind of proof that didn't depend on my ability to stay calm. So I kept collecting it. I kept smiling. I kept acting. And the acting was its own kind of cruelty, because it meant every normal moment had an extra layer. When he kissed my cheek, I didn't know if it was habit or strategy. When he brought up the future, I couldn't tell if he meant our future or his plan. A week later, my parents' anniversary party showed me just how bold they'd gotten. My parents throw big backyard gatherings because they love the idea of family, especially the kind that looks good from the outside. They live 10 minutes from me in the same suburb, close enough that my mother can appear with a casserole like a surprise attack. The woman and her parents were invited, of course. My best friend came with me, not because she likes parties, she doesn't, but because she wasn't going to let me go in alone. My husband showed up later and immediately drifted toward the woman like he was pulled by a magnet. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. The way their bodies angled toward each other, the way their eyes met and held. Most people wouldn't notice. I did, because when you're married, you know what attention looks like. You know what it looks like when someone's trying not to get caught. At one point, they stood near the patio door, too close, and she laughed and touched his arm. I snapped a photo with my phone held low, pretending I was checking a message. My hands weren't trembling this time. I felt cold. I felt precise. During dinner, the woman said something about some women not knowing when to let go, and she looked right at me, smiling like she was being helpful. My mother laughed. My father didn't notice. My husband stared at his plate like it had secrets. I smiled back and said, "I really admire loyalty. People who mean what they promise. It's rare." My mother-in-law was there too, because my mother believes in one big happy extended family and refuses to admit that sometimes together is just a prettier word for tolerate. My mother-in-law cared about appearances like it was oxygen. Her eyes flicked to my husband for a fraction of a second, and in that flicker I saw doubt. Not belief, not certainty, but a crack. That night, after we got home, I cried in my car in the driveway because I couldn't do it inside. I didn't want him to hear me. I didn't want him to think he still had access to my tears. My best friend sat in the passenger seat holding my hand, and when I finally wiped my face, she said, "Okay, now we move." I went inside, took a shower, and opened the tablet again. I scrolled farther back through messages I hadn't had the nerve to read before. And that's when I found the part that turned my sadness into something sharper. He wasn't just planning to leave, he was planning to take the house. He wrote to the woman about getting on the title and how once it's in both names, She can't keep it. He mentioned selling it and starting fresh. He called it her grandmother's place like it was a coupon. Like it wasn't the house where I sat with my grandmother when she was sick and promised I'd make something of myself. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I put the tablet down and just sat there in the dark, listening to my husband breathe in the bedroom, and I thought, you are sleeping next to someone who is trying to steal from you. And you are being polite about it. The next morning changed everything. I called in sick. I never call in sick. I'm the person who drags herself in with a fever because guilt is basically part of my uniform. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't talk about patient satisfaction surveys while my marriage was actively trying to rob me. My best friend came over again and I showed her the messages. Oh, he's arrogant, she said. And it made me exhale because arrogance is something you can predict. He thinks he can talk his way through anything. Sometimes he can, I admitted, because that's the terrifying part. He could look you in the eyes and say nonsense like it was truth, and you'd almost believe him. Not if you get ahead of him, she said. So I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer that afternoon and told my husband I had a dentist appointment. I hated lying. I hated that I had to measure my honesty like it was a luxury. But I also hated the alternative, being naive. The lawyer's office was beige and boring and smelled like stale coffee, like every depressing adult place in the world. I sat in the waiting room gripping my purse strap and feeling like I was about to confess something illegal. When the lawyer called me back, I handed over my phone and let her scroll through the screenshots. She didn't gasp. She didn't say, wow. She was calm, practical, like she'd seen this exact mess 100 times. She asked about the house. I told her it was an inheritance, only in my name, and that it had been kept separate. In most cases, she said, an inheritance kept separate remains separate. The key is not to blur ownership. Don't add his name. Don't refinance with him on it. Don't sign anything he pushes without review. She also asked what money had paid for what. Repairs, taxes, any upgrades, because commingling was where people got sloppy. I told her the truth. I'd kept the house expenses traceable and separate on purpose, even when it was annoying, because my grandmother had always warned me that paperwork matters more than charm. I swallowed. He's pushing. He wants his name on the title. She nodded once. Then we don't do that. If you want extra protection, we can prepare a post-nuptial agreement that confirms the house is your separate property and that he waives any claim. It's simple, it's common, and it makes your position clear. The words felt clinical and gross, waives any claim, like I was closing a membership. But then I remembered his message about selling my grandmother's house for a new beginning, and my disgust turned into focus. What if he signs it? I asked slowly, because he thinks it's helping him. The lawyer paused, studying me, then said, he'd have to sign knowingly. I would tell him clearly that I don't represent him, and he should be encouraged to have his own counsel. But people waive that, especially people who think they understand. My stomach flipped. He hates feeling like he doesn't understand. Then ego does the work, she said. I left the office feeling like I'd swallowed a stone. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad and furious and locked in, like my emotions had finally lined up in one direction. On the drive home, I practiced my face in the rearview mirror. Neutral, soft, normal. I hated that I had to rehearse being normal in my own life. After that, I split into two versions of myself. At work, I was the coordinator who could solve everything with a clipboard and a calm face. At home, I was an actress in my own marriage, smiling when I wanted to bite, nodding when I wanted to scream. I kept gathering proof. I kept moving small amounts of money to my account. I kept documenting like my life had turned into charting. My husband kept bringing up the house, always framed as practical. We should put me on the title, he said one night while we were brushing our teeth, like it was the same as changing a light bulb. It'll be easier if something happens to you. If something happens to me, I repeated. Toothpaste foam at the corner of my mouth, and a dark laugh tried to crawl up my throat. Because sure, that's what this is about. My safety. It's smart, he insisted. We're married. I've helped with the house. You helped, I echoed. You mean you assembled that bookshelf and complained for 3 days? He frowned. Don't be like that. I'm being like what? I asked, and I had to clamp my mouth shut to keep from exploding. Then, like clockwork, he started being nicer. Too nice. Flowers. Compliments. Back rubs. He offered to cook dinner, which he almost never did unless it involved a grill and him acting like he invented meat. He touched my waist when he walked past me, and it used to feel affectionate. Now it felt like he was checking if I was still compliant. One night, he poured me a glass of wine and said, "We haven't been connecting. He said it like he was wounded. I miss you. I stared at him and felt anger build behind my teeth. I've been working, I said. I know, he sighed, but sometimes it feels like you care more about your job than us. That was one of his favorite weapons, the guilt. The implication that if I loved him enough, I'd magically be less exhausted. You want to know what my job is, I said, voice tight. My job is watching people die. My job is telling nurses to cover extra units because someone called out with the flu. My job is being yelled at because we can't bend time. So yes, sometimes I'm tired. That doesn't mean I don't care about us. He looked away, jaw working. I'm not saying you don't care, he said, then added almost casually, if we refinanced, maybe you wouldn't have to work so hard. We could use some equity, do upgrades, take a vacation. It would be good for us. Upgrades. That word made my hand tighten around a glass. It slipped, cracked, and a shard sliced my finger. Blood welled up and I gasped. Oh my God, he said, and for a second his face looked genuinely concerned. He wrapped my hand in a towel. Then he said quietly, don't tell your mom. She'll make a big deal. That sentence hit me harder than the cut. The casual isolation, the way he wanted to control who I spoke to. I nodded like I agreed, because I was beyond pretending to argue. A few days later, I told him I'd talked to someone at the bank and they needed paperwork for refinancing and the title. I said my mother insisted on it because she was helping and wanted everything documented, and I deliberately made it sound annoying. I knew he hated my mother's opinions. I knew he'd rather sign something than hear her say she didn't trust him. He rolled his eyes. Of course she does. So we just go sign, I said, keeping my voice soft. It's standard. We'll be in and out. The day we went to the lawyer's office, my heart felt like it was trying to escape through my ribs. My husband acted like he owned the room, joking with the receptionist, complimenting the decor. He sat down and started flipping through the document, and his brows pulled together at phrases like irrevocable waiver. What does that mean? He asked, glancing at me like I'd set a trap. Which, yes, I had. The lawyer explained calmly that it confirmed the house was my separate property and that he would be acknowledging he had no claim to it. Then she did the part that mattered, the part that would later shut down the I was tricked story. She slid a second page toward him and said, very clearly, that she did not represent him, that he could take it home, that he could have his own lawyer review it, and that if he signed anyway, he'd be confirming he understood the terms and was signing voluntarily. She repeated it twice, like she'd learned the hard way that people pretend not to hear what they don't like. There was even a notary in the corner, bored as a chaperone, ready to stamp whatever our lives had become. My husband hesitated, and for the first time in weeks, I saw uncertainty in his face. I leaned in and said softly, if you don't trust me, don't sign. It's fine. We'll drop the refinancing. I'll tell my mom it won't work. No big deal. I watched his pride flare. He hated the idea of my mother thinking he was weak. He hated the idea of me thinking he didn't understand. He straightened his shoulders and signed. The pen scratched across paper, and it sounded like a door closing. In the car afterward, he was unusually quiet. I kept my eyes on the road because if I looked at him, I might start shaking from adrenaline. You good? I asked, because apparently I enjoy pain. Yeah, he said. Just a lot of paperwork. A lot, I agreed, voice steady. Inside, my brain was screaming, you just signed away your fantasy because you couldn't stand looking cautious. That night, alone in the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror and whispered, okay, like I was trying to convince myself I was still real. Betrayal is isolating in a way people don't understand until they live it. It makes you question your instincts, your memory, your sanity. It makes you wonder if you're overreacting even when you're staring at a photo. So I did the only thing that felt safe. I pulled other people into the truth on purpose, so he couldn't keep the story in a private room. I planned a Sunday lunch at my parents' house and invited both families, mine, his, and the woman's parents. I framed it as an important announcement about the future. My husband got excited in that greedy way of his. He thought it was about the house. He thought he was winning. My best friend came early with a little device that let her mirror her phone to the television. We tested it twice. I also printed a handful of screenshots because I didn't trust technology not to choose violence at the worst moment. Yes, I know. The irony is embarrassing. When everyone arrived, the atmosphere was normal in that family gathering way. Fake smiles, small talk, comments about food. The woman showed up in a bright dress and acted like she belonged. My mother hugged her like she was a niece. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. We ate. Plates clinked. Someone joked about the weather. My husband kept touching my knee under the table like he was performing Husband of the Year. After lunch, I stood up and cleared my throat. My voice sounded too loud in the living room. I wanted everyone here, I began. Because… My husband cut in, laughing. Oh my God, is this about her again? He gestured toward the woman like she was a harmless prop. You've been obsessed since you were kids. My cheeks burned. The woman smiled like she was enjoying a show. My mother-in-law's face tightened, ready to defend her son. You should be embarrassed, my mother-in-law snapped. Accusing my son in front of everyone. For a second, I wanted to run. For a second, I wanted to scream. Instead, my best friend stood up beside me, calm as a nurse in a crisis, and mirrored the screen. The first screenshot popped up on the television. My husband calling me an obstacle. Then another, him talking about getting on the title. Then the message about selling the house for our new beginning. The room went dead silent. My mother covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, but she made no sound. My father stood up slowly, face pale. My mother-in-law's lips parted, but nothing came out. The woman's father stared at the screen like he couldn't process what he was reading. The woman herself went stiff, her smile collapsing into panic. My husband turned toward the television, then toward me, then back again like blinking could erase it. What the hell is this? He said, voice cracking. And before you start talking about the house, I said, and my voice shook, but I kept going. You should know you signed a document confirming you have no claim to it. You waived any rights. His face drained of color. What document? He whispered. The paperwork you signed, I said. The standard paperwork. He stared at me like I'd grown horns. You tricked me, he said, loud enough to make my mother flinch. I looked at him and said, I protected myself. From you. The woman tried to speak. It's not, she started, then forced a laugh that sounded like a cough. It's not like that. He was venting. He was stressed. My father stepped forward and pointed toward the front door. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The gesture was enough. Out, he said. My husband stuttered. We can talk privately. No, my father said, still pointing. Out. The woman's parents left first. Her mother wouldn't look at her. Her father's jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. My husband's parents followed, furious and humiliated, and my mother-in-law shot me a look like she wanted to blame me but couldn't find a socially acceptable angle. My husband lingered like he thought he could still touch my arm and smooth this over. I stepped back before he could. His hand hung in the air for a second, ridiculous and empty. I'm done, I said. It came out calmer than I felt. I'm done being lied to. I'm done being made to feel crazy. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, he couldn't charm his way out of it. After they left, my mother started sobbing. My best friend guided her to the couch like she was a patient. My father walked onto the porch and stood there staring at the yard like he needed air. He came back in a minute later and hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. He whispered, I'm sorry, like he was apologizing that my life had been contaminated. I drove home alone that night and sat in my driveway for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, shaking. I thought I'd feel victorious. I didn't. I felt hollow. I felt like I'd ripped my own skin off in front of everyone, and now I still had to go inside and sleep in the same house where the lies had been spoken. The next day, I did the boring, protective things that don't look dramatic but keep your life from being yanked around. I followed my lawyer's advice and filed what I needed to file right away, because speed matters in situations like this. I also changed the locks. My lawyer had put it in simple terms. The house was my separate property, he'd left after the confrontation, and until anything said otherwise, I could secure my home and keep documentation. So my best friend came over with coffee and a toolkit like she was helping me build a spine. Then we did the unglamorous part. I walked from room to room with my phone and recorded everything. The furniture, the appliances, the closet, the garage. I felt ridiculous narrating my own possessions like a documentary, but my lawyer had used the word inventory, and my brain latched onto it like a life raft. I opened drawers and filmed what was inside, because the thought of him later claiming I hid something made my stomach churn. My mother came to stay with me for a few nights. She insisted, like I was 12 and had a nightmare. I didn't love it, but I also didn't have the energy to fight her. I let her fold my laundry and hover in the kitchen like hovering could keep my heart from breaking. My husband started blowing up my phone. Apologies that sounded like scripts. Anger. Guilt. Messages about how I humiliated him. At one point he wrote, "You could have handled this privately." I stared at that message for a long time because it was such a perfect snapshot of him still trying to control the narrative. He didn't mean privately for my sake. He meant privately so he could keep spinning. I'm not proud of it, but I texted back, "You handled cheating privately. How did that go?" His mother called me and didn't start with "Are you okay?" which told me everything I needed to know about what she cared about. She started with, "You embarrassed us." I laughed and it came out ugly. "He embarrassed you," I said. "I just stopped covering for him." "He's under stress," she insisted. "Like stress makes you accidentally book hotel rooms. You work all the time. Blythe, you know you can be intense." There it was. Turn my competence into a character flaw. "If my job made him unhappy," I said slowly, "he could have talked to me. He could have left. He could have gone to therapy. He could have done 1,000 things that didn't involve lying to my face and planning to take my house." "He wouldn't do that," she snapped. "He wouldn't try to take your house." "He already tried," I said. "He put it in writing." She cried, sharp and offended, and then she hung up. My hands were shaking afterward, but I also felt lighter, like I'd finally stopped auditioning for the role of niece daughter-in-law. A couple of days later, my husband asked to come get his things. The phrasing alone made my teeth hurt. His things. In my house. Like he was the one being inconvenienced. My lawyer told me not to be alone with him. My father told me the same. My best friend volunteered to stand in the doorway with a bat, and I loved her for it. But we chose the calmer option, a scheduled pickup in broad daylight, with my father and my best friend present, and with everything already boxed. I packed his clothes into cardboard boxes and labeled them in a way that felt petty and satisfying. Work shirts, shoes, random chargers, the blender he swore he'd use. I put the boxes in the garage so he wouldn't have to step through the house, because I couldn't stand the idea of him breathing in my kitchen like he still belonged there. When he arrived, he looked like he'd slept in his car. Red eyes, wrinkled clothes, that injured posture men use when they want you to feel sorry for them. "I can't believe you did this," he said immediately, voice thick, like I'd committed a crime against him. My father stood beside me and said, "Get your boxes." My husband flinched at my father's tone, then turned to me, trying for softness. "Blythe, please, can we just talk for a minute?" "No," I said. He glanced at the house. "You changed the locks." "I did," I said. He laughed once, bitter. "So that's it. 2 years and you just throw me out." "You threw yourself out," I said, and my voice surprised me. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't pleading. I sounded like someone reading a diagnosis. His face tightened. "She meant nothing," he snapped, switching lanes fast. "It was just—" "Stop," my best friend said. "Get your boxes." He carried them to his car in angry jerks, like every box weighed 100 pounds. Halfway through, he set one down and looked at me again, desperate. "You're really going to do this?" he whispered. I wanted to say, "I didn't want this." I wanted to say, "I loved you." I wanted to say, "I'm terrified." Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. "Yes." His eyes flashed. "You're going to regret it," he muttered, then slammed his trunk like it was punctuation and drove away. After he left, I sat on the garage step and shook so hard my teeth clicked. My father sat down beside me and didn't say anything for a minute. Then he said, "I'm proud of you." And for the first time since the restaurant, I cried in a way that felt like release instead of drowning. The first therapy appointment happened the next morning, because after the pickup, I realized my body was running the show. I walked into the waiting room thinking I'd be composed, and instead I cried because the receptionist smiled kindly and my nervous system took it as permission to fall apart. Therapy didn't fix me. It didn't give me a perfect script. But my therapist said, "Your nervous system is acting like you're still bracing for impact because betrayal is an emotional injury. That's normal." Hearing my chaos described in calm words helped more than I expected. She asked me what I did when I felt panic. I told her honestly that I checked locks, that I reread screenshots, that I scrolled messages like if I stopped, the truth would dissolve. "That's your brain trying to create certainty," she said. "It's not silly. It's survival. We just have to give it healthier anchors." So we built stupid little anchors. A grounding technique where I name things I can see, things I can feel, things I can hear. A breathing pattern that felt fake at first and then, annoyingly, worked. A rule that I don't reread messages after a certain hour because it keeps my adrenaline high. And a plan for when my brain tries to time travel to that restaurant window. I stand up. I put my feet on the floor. I tell myself out loud what day it is, where I am, and that he is not in my house. Work got harder before it got easier. I thought the hospital would be a distraction. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was a mirror. I'd be standing at the nurse's station telling someone, "Take a breath. We'll figure it out." While my own body was screaming, "You are barely holding it together." I snapped at a nurse one day for being late, and the way her eyes widened made me feel sick immediately. She didn't deserve my anger. She was a tired person in the same broken system. I apologized later in the break room and she accepted, but the guilt sat in my chest for days. My boss pulled me aside again and said, "You don't have to explain, but I need you to take care of yourself before you burn out." I wanted to laugh because burnout was the air we breathed, but I also didn't want to be proud in a way that killed me. I took a few days of leave, not because it fixed anything, but because it gave my body a chance to stop shaking. During those days, my mother tried to do what she always does when conflict makes her uncomfortable. She tried to smooth it over with politeness. "We should talk to her parents," she said one afternoon while she folded my towels like she was auditioning for domestic sainthood. "They're mortified," they called. They said they didn't know. I stared at my towels. "They raised her," I said. "They may not have known details, but they knew who she was." "They're our friends," my mother insisted. "We can't just—" "Watch me," my father cut in from the doorway. He'd come over after work, still in his jacket, expression flat in a way that made my mother's shoulders stiff. My mother turned. "This is not your decision." "It is when it involves our daughter being treated like collateral," my father said. "She doesn't owe them comfort." My mother's cheeks flushed. "So we just throw away decades of friendship?" My father's voice stayed calm. "They threw away respect. Friendship without respect is just habit." My mother looked at me then, eyes pleading, like she wanted me to choose the version of family that made her life easier. My throat tightened, because that's the part nobody warns you about. Betrayal doesn't just break your marriage. It exposes the weak spots in your whole ecosystem. "I'm not going to socialize with them," I said quietly. "Not for you, not for anyone." My mother's eyes filled with tears. She set a towel down too hard. "You're being cruel." "No," I said. "I'm being honest." That night, I lay awake thinking about how many times I'd swallowed my discomfort in the name of peace. How many events I'd endured because my mother said, "Don't make it awkward." How many times I'd been told to be the mature one. And I realized something ugly and freeing. Being mature had often meant being quiet. The divorce process moved like slow, grinding machinery. My lawyer filed. His lawyer responded. Dates got set, then moved, then set again. My husband tried to stall like he could tire me into giving up. He also tried to charm. He sent flowers to my work, which earned him a look from the front desk nurse that could have melted concrete. When that didn't work, he tried humiliation. He told mutual acquaintances I was cold and calculating. He made it sound like I'd been plotting to ruin him from day one. Part of me wanted to counter every rumor with facts. Another part of me was exhausted by the idea of fighting in invisible rooms. My therapist said, "You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to." So I didn't. I focused on the pieces I could control. My accounts, my boundaries, my home, my sleep, the tiny moments of calm that felt like rebellion. Mediation day arrived like a bad appointment you can't cancel. I had to sit in a sterile office across from the man I'd once held at night and pretend we weren't strangers now. He looked angry and hollow, like someone who'd lost his favorite toy and blamed the toy for leaving. "You're really going to do this?" he said as soon as we sat down, like he hadn't already done it first. My lawyer squeezed my elbow lightly, a reminder to breathe. I stared at a spot on the table and said, "Yes." He leaned back, smug in that way he used to get when he thought he was winning. "Fine," he said. "Then we split everything 50-50, including the house." My lawyer didn't blink. "The house is separate property by inheritance," she said. "And there is a signed post-nuptial agreement confirming the waiver." My husband's face changed in slow motion, like a mask slipping. "That document was—" he started. "The document was signed voluntarily, acknowledged, and notarized," my lawyer said calmly, "and he was explicitly advised to seek independent counsel." My husband turned his anger toward me like a spotlight. "You set me up!" he hissed. I wanted to flinch. I didn't. I heard my therapist's voice in my head. "Name what's happening." "You're angry that you can't take what isn't yours," I said. He stared, shocked, like he expected tears, not words. Then he laughed, sharp and ugly. "Look at you, finally showing who you are." I almost took the bait. Almost. Then I imagined the restaurant window again and the way he'd looked through me. I didn't owe him softness. The rest of mediation was boring, hostile arithmetic. Who keeps which car, who takes which debt, how the joint account would be closed, how personal property would be divided without turning it into a scavenger hunt. When it came to the money he'd spent during the affair, my lawyer kept it simple. We didn't argue over every dinner receipt. We argued over the pattern. We argued over fairness. We argued over closing the joint account and preventing him from draining it in the meantime. My husband left early, storming out like a teenager. His lawyer looked tired, which was the only moment of satisfaction I allowed myself. After that, the paperwork dragged, but the outline of my future got clearer. The house would stay mine. The joint account would be closed properly through the bank with signed agreements. His name would not touch my deed. My life would not be something he could refinance into a new personality. The bank part was not dramatic. It was fluorescent lights and forms, and a banker who said, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," in the same tone people use when they're handing you a parking ticket. But it mattered, because money is where people like my husband reveal their real priorities. I got an alert on our joint account one afternoon. A transfer request. Not huge, but enough to make my stomach twist. I realized he was trying to pull money before I could finish separating things. I called the bank and put the simplest freeze they offered on new transfers until we could close the account properly. I went in after my shift and signed what I could sign without him. Eventually, because the bank needed both of us for certain steps, and because I couldn't live like my paycheck was a shared vulnerability, we finished the closure through the process my lawyer recommended. It wasn't satisfying. It was necessary. My husband flipped from apology to accusation when he realized he couldn't just take what he wanted. He texted, "You stole from me." He called me selfish. He said, "I built that savings with you," ignoring the fact I built most of it with overtime and weekend shifts and missed holidays. He ignored the fact he'd been spending our money on dinners and hotels while I was packing lunches to save. For one night, I almost wrote him a long explanation, because another flaw of mine is wanting to be understood by people who don't deserve the effort. Then I remembered his face in that restaurant window, relaxed and happy, and I deleted the draft. I didn't owe him a persuasive essay. His coworker, the one who'd confirmed the sick day, sent me a message. "I feel awful." He asked me to cover for him. It's been going on for months. He offered to put it in writing. He did. Just a plain statement with dates. I attached it the way my lawyer suggested, mostly so no one could pretend his overtime story was real and so his version couldn't float around untouched. His parents, to their credit, didn't fully take his side. They were ashamed and furious. They also didn't want their friends talking, which is a motivation I understand even if I hate it. They kicked him out of their house after he got caught still seeing the woman. He bounced between sleeping on someone's couch and renting a room from a coworker, and every message he sent sounded like he was shopping for sympathy. At home, the quiet after he left wasn't instantly peaceful. It was loud in a different way. The house creaked, and my brain turned each sound into a question. I had nightmares where I'd open my front door and see the restaurant window, like my mind had turned it into a recurring horror scene. Sometimes I'd wake up to my own phone buzzing and my heart would sprint even if it was just a work notification. One night I did something petty and impulsive. I wrote a vague post on a social media app about trust and betrayal and immediately regretted it. I deleted it within minutes and then stared at my ceiling, mortified, because I hated the idea of my pain becoming content for strangers. I didn't want pity, I didn't want commentary, I just wanted to not feel like my skin was buzzing with adrenaline all the time. My therapist asked me, "What do you miss?" I hated the question because the answer was embarrassing. "I miss thinking I was safe," I said. She nodded. "So we rebuild safety. Not by pretending nothing happened, by making your life consistent with your boundaries." So I did tiny things. I repainted the bedroom because I couldn't stand looking at the walls where I'd stared at the ceiling in panic. I donated the extra towels my husband claimed were his. I threw out the cheap cologne he left behind. I rearranged furniture like moving a couch could move grief. I made a new routine where I locked the door once, checked it once, and then went to bed. If I got up again, I had to do a grounding technique first. It sounds silly. It wasn't. It was practice. Then he tried to contest the agreement, because of course he did. About a month after mediation, his lawyer filed a challenge arguing he didn't understand what he'd signed. When my lawyer told me, my stomach tightened so hard I thought I might be sick again, not because I thought he'd win, but because I hated being dragged back into his reality. We showed up to a short hearing that felt like standing under fluorescent lights in a dentist's office. Uncomfortable, exposed, and too bright. My husband sat on the other side of the room in a stiff suit, performing innocence like it was a job. When the judge asked him why he signed, He said he felt pressured. He said he thought it was just for refinancing. He tried to make himself look like a confused victim. Then my lawyer calmly walked the judge through the pages. The part where he was advised to get his own counsel, the acknowledgement that he understood, the notary stamp, the timeline, the messages about getting on the title, the way he'd been actively trying to secure the house while also cheating. The judge's expression didn't change much, but I watched my husband's shoulders tense as the story stopped being his to control. The decision was quick, not dramatic, just a firm refusal to entertain his regret as a legal strategy. My lawyer didn't celebrate. She just said, "That's resolved," like she was closing a file. I went home after and sat on my porch with my grandmother's old blanket and cried quietly, because even when you win, you still grieve what you thought your life was. Months passed. The divorce finalized eventually. Not with fireworks, not with closure, just a stack of papers and a tired exhale. I expected to feel triumphant. I felt tired. I felt older. I also felt a thin thread of relief winding through my days, like my body finally understood the worst had already happened, and I was still standing. A couple of months after the final papers, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my husband and the woman had already burned each other out. It wasn't a dramatic breakup with yelling in a driveway. It was worse, honestly. It was the slow realization that they'd liked the fantasy more than the reality. She wanted a man who could take care of her the way she thought I did, and he wanted someone who didn't ask questions and didn't have boundaries. Turns out two selfish people don't magically become generous when the honeymoon is built on lies. Then, because I'm apparently allergic to taking it slow, I agreed to a dinner date months later, introduced through my best friend. I said yes, because I wanted to prove I wasn't broken. I wanted to prove I could sit across from someone and not see my husband in every gesture. The date was at a small restaurant. Nothing fancy, just decent food and a calm vibe. He was kind. He asked questions about my job without acting like I was reciting a resume. He laughed at my darker jokes instead of looking concerned. For the first half of the meal, I felt almost light, like maybe I could be a person again instead of a wound in scrubs. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and flipped it face down on the table without thinking. My heart slammed. My throat tightened. My brain flashed images. My husband's phone angled away. The secret messages. The lies. I smiled too brightly, said, "I'm so sorry. I just remembered I have to be up early," and left before he could even ask what was wrong. In my car, I cried so hard I got a headache. I was furious at myself for panicking. I was furious at my husband for wiring my nervous system to treat a phone as a threat. I called my therapist and left a voicemail that was basically just me breathing and whispering, "I'm not okay." She called back later and talked me down like panic was a symptom instead of my identity. When I finally stopped shaking, I drafted an explanation text to the guy, erased it 3 times, then sent something short. "I'm sorry I left abruptly. Something got triggered and I panicked. It wasn't about you." I stared at the message for 10 minutes before I hit send like it was a bomb. He replied with, "Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you got home safe. No pressure." The kindness made me cry again, which was honestly rude of my emotions at that point. But it also made me realize something. My life wasn't only made of betrayal. There were still people who showed up gently. There were still moments that didn't hurt. A week after that date fiasco, I ran into the woman in the grocery store parking lot. It was the kind of coincidence people think is fake until they live in a suburb where everyone shops at the same places. I was loading bags into my trunk when I heard her voice. "Blythe." I turned, and there she was, holding a bag of expensive-looking things, wearing sunglasses like a shield. She looked thinner. Her mouth was tight. Her posture screamed defensive, like she'd been rehearsing this conversation in her head. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," she said quickly. "He told me you were controlling. He said you didn't love him anymore. He said you treated him like a child." I stared at her. My first impulse was rage. My second impulse was exhaustion. "And you believed him," I said flatly. She shrugged like that was an answer. "He was unhappy. He cheated," I said. She lifted her chin. "You were always jealous of me." There it was. The story she told herself to make her choices feel justified. I wanted her life. She deserved it. I was in her way. I let out a short laugh. "Jealous," I repeated. "Of you." Her face tightened. "You always had to be the good one," she snapped. "The responsible one. Everyone always praised you for working so hard, for being so mature." It was exhausting to watch. I felt something twist in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. She genuinely believed my life was handed to me, that my exhaustion was privilege. You could have built your own life, I said quietly. Instead, you tried to take mine. Her eyes flashed. He chose me. No, I said, and my voice stayed calm in a way that almost scared me. He chose himself, and you chose a story where you get to be the victim. For a second, she looked like she might cry. Then she swallowed it down and said, "Whatever. You think you're better." I could have said 1,000 cruel things. I could have thrown the restaurant photo at her like a weapon. I could have told her all the ways she'd been pathetic since we were kids. Instead, I felt tired, like my anger had already done its job and now it was retiring. "It's over," I said. "That's all." I got into my car and drove away with my hands steady. When I got home, I texted my best friend. I saw her. She called immediately, voice sharp, asking where I was, like she could physically fight my feelings for me. "I'm home," I said, sitting on my couch in my own living room, the one that still smelled faintly like my grandmother's candles sometimes. "I'm okay. I'm just buzzing." Later that night, because I'm apparently a glutton for pain, I scrolled a social media app. I found the woman's profile. She'd posted a photo of herself at some event, smiling too hard. There were few comments, nothing like the attention she used to soak up when she was younger. The emptiness hit me in a weird place. Not satisfaction, more like proof that her world had shrunk. Weeks later, my mother mentioned that someone had quietly uninvited the woman from a holiday gathering because they didn't want problems. My mother said it like she was being gentle. I didn't respond. I just nodded and went back to chopping vegetables for dinner because life keeps moving even when you're still processing the wreckage. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that restaurant window, about how I didn't go inside, about how I made a secret email in a parking lot, about how my first instinct was to document, like my marriage was a file. I don't like who I became in those months. I don't like the hypervigilance, the acting, the way my body learned to flinch, but I also know this. If I hadn't been careful, he would have taken more than my trust. He would have taken my grandmother's house. He would have taken the one solid thing my family ever managed to hand down to me. And I know he still tells his version to anyone who will listen. In his version, he made a mistake. He got confused. He didn't realize what he was signing. He acts like the universe bullied him into consequences. A mutual acquaintance once told me he tried that speech at a get-together and someone finally snapped, "Man, stop blaming her for your choices." I didn't even ask who said it. I just smiled into my tea like I'd been handed a small, quiet gift. In my version, the real one, I loved him and trusted him, and he still tried to sell my childhood home to fund his new beginning. He smiled at me, brought me flowers, touched my knee under my parents' table, and then went right back to plotting. So no, I don't forgive easily. I don't hand out closure like party favors. I'm learning to build a life where family doesn't mean swallowing poison to keep everyone comfortable. I'm learning to let silence be a boundary instead of a punishment. And on the nights when the house creaks and my brain tries to drag me back into that parking lot, I get up, walk into the kitchen, and touch the old table my grandmother used. I remind myself I'm still here. The house is still mine. My life is not something a jealous woman can steal just by wanting it more. Then I make tea because apparently that's what my new rebellion looks like. Choosing calm in the same rooms where I once felt like I was losing my mind.